All right, so share some stories with you today, share about ministry internationally with the Nazarene Church, and even domestically here where I'm working now at Shepherd Community. We used to have teams come in, and short-term mission teams, and they would always bring some funds. I'd ask them to bring a little extra funds so we could food. Did that go out on you, or is it just me and my ears? I thought my microphone died out a little bit. Anyway, we brought food with them, money for food. So they'd bring the resources, and I would go buy food, and we'd make bags of food and go deliver them door to door. One of my favorite activities ever with teams. And one day we are in the mountains of Honduras on the northern part near Guatemala, and we are at a real small town called Pita. And we have a team from Evansville, actually. My brother-in-law is Chet Todd, Pastor Chet Todd, and he and his wife pastored the Evansville First. Well, it's not that anymore. It's called Wellspring. And so they're there with us, and we start talking to the pastor. We pray over the food. We grab our bags, and like little pack mules, we start walking. And now this is a small town in the mountains, so you're talking about one street, and I didn't think it'd take very long, and we had like 50 or 60 bags of food. And as we're walking down the streets, we begin to take a left, and we start walking down this dirt road, and we start entering into trees and jungle and more jungle, cross a river, and as we're going, we see these little houses, and we stop at the houses. And you might look at them as shacks or shanties, and we will go up on the door and knock on it and say, hey, we're the Church of the Nazarene in La Pita, and we have some food. We want to give you some food. And we use that to make connections to that community with the Church of the Nazarene. And we pray with them and say, hey, how can we pray for you, and what else do you need? And it's a great way to kind of love on the neighbors there. And as we keep on walking, I'm like, surely there's not more houses down this little path. And the path keeps on getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And we cross another creek, and then we start following this creek. And we're probably in about 2 hours of walking, carrying, I don't know how heavy these bags are, but they're pretty heavy. And, your fingers are starting to turn red. And I finally have like one bag left, and they're like, our last house is just down this way. I'm looking back like, where are we at? It's a thick canopy, and we walk up to this house, and there's two rivers or two creeks that intersect, and there's this little house right here. She has a fenced-in yard, kind of like this picket fence, and a bunch of chickens and roosters, and banana plantation, little thing out in the back with about 6 or 7 trees, and there's not a whole lot here. A couple dogs come barking out at the fence at us, and we enter in, and we said, hey, we're the Church of the Nazarene, and the pastor's talking, and we want to bring you some food. And she begins to weep. She said, this morning, I was on my knees asking God, how am I going to eat today? What am I going to do for my kids? And he answers. And we brought food. We were his feet. We were his hands. We were Jesus in the flesh, answering her prayer. And I'll never forget that, obviously. That's what the Church of the Nazarene does all across the world. We are his hands and feet. We are Jesus in the flesh to people around the church. You are Jesus in the flesh to your neighbors around the community. There are times when we were doing this food delivery, again, food distribution, where Jesus entered in and we had prayer with people and healed them. It's amazing stuff where you're seeing someone had a rash on their arm, prayed over it, gone. Hands were hurting. I forget what was the hand ailment, but she felt a burning sensation and then got restoration of her hand. This is not us doing this, mind you. We have access to the Creator, to Jesus, who can do this. Just the simple fact of taking food to someone's house, opening the door, and allowing God to work through that, through our part, because we have our part to play too. We saw God do some amazing, amazing stuff. Many, many lives were impacted just through a simple food distribution. An act that for us is no big deal. It just takes a little bit of sacrifice of walking, sometimes a couple hours in the jungle. But yeah, we also use that to open doors for the Jesus film. You guys are familiar with the Jesus film. I tried to show that with every team somewhere where we're working. And so while we're at the houses, we'd invite them, hey, come on out and see the Jesus film tonight or tomorrow night. And again, amazing, amazing times when God would actually meet us there on the street where we're showing the film. We got the little screen popped up there, my little projector about this big, showing up there, and we'd have sometimes 60 to 100 people show up and watch the film. And then God would move in that crowd as well. Let me talk about John 21. I'm going to read this for you, but I want you to look at three things as I'm reading this. I want you to look at what resources did Jesus give the disciples? What did the disciples give back? And then where was Jesus working? Okay, so John 21 is what we're going to look at. And again, what were the resources that he gave them? What did the disciples give back? And where was Jesus working? And this is the NLT, so it may sound a little different if you're not using NLT, but I like this one because it's my level. It says, later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples. Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. We'll come too, they all said. So they went out in a boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. So he called out, fellows, have you caught any fish? No, they replied. Then Jesus said, throw your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some. So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. When Simon Peter heard this, he put up his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped in the water, and headed to the shore. The others stayed in the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from the shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over the charcoal fire, and some bread. Bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus said. So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to shore. There were 153 large fish, and yet the net hadn't torn. Now, come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them bread and fish. So go back to the questions. What resources did he give the disciples? And sometimes we have to take a little look around us to see what resources he gave us. But Jesus gave them the direction to where to throw the net, and then he gave them the fish. Okay? So those are the two resources in this story. There's probably more. So what did the disciples give back? Well, after they got to the shore, they gave him fish. He said, bring your fish to me. And they also gave him their time. Relationships, come have breakfast with me. And it wasn't just to eat. It was to talk. It was to say, hey, how's it going? So they had conversation. Then the third question was, where is he working? And he was making a meal. He was there already making a meal, preparing it for them. They brought their fish, and they worked together. They had a relationship together. They talked. So I'm going to relate that to our call to the mission field and then back to Indianapolis. Missionary life was not on my radar at all. I was fat and happy, literally, working at an insurance company in Indianapolis, enjoying mission trips and going and on mission trips here and there. And my first mission trip was to Honduras. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is great. And I did it for the adventure, right? Because I'm like an adventurer. I love to do different things and experience different things and travel. So it was kind of out of a selfish reason that I went. But when I came back, I'm like, ooh, I don't know. So I went to Karen and said, hey, this missionary life, this mission work's pretty fun. And let's go be missionaries. And she's like, whatever. I'm not going to do that. So her real words were, shut up. I don't want to hear that. I'm not interested in being a missionary. So it wasn't really a whatever. So I kept on going on mission trips. But after a while, God put it in my heart to do mission work. But he had to deal with my wife as well. And eventually he did talk to her one day during a matter of fact, it was Faith Promise weekend. And he talked to her and said, you know what, get out of the way, I'm working here. So she knew that we were going to be missionaries, and she had to work through all the logistics of that in her head. So trip after trip, I got hooked, and God began to use me and my wife and our family in ways I had no idea he would. And I really felt unqualified. I was like, there's no way that God's going to use me because I have no skill set for missionary work. You've met Brian Ruark, right? You went to Puerto Cortez. Quick story about Brian. And sorry, I got to look at my time too. Brian is a missionary in Honduras too, and he felt the same way. And this is what triggered this thought: is that he asked God one time, "Why are you calling me to Honduras to be a missionary? I'm not even qualified. I'm a photographer, and I'm young, and I have no experience." And he said, "Brian, I have asked 7 other people that are more qualified than you, but they've all said no. You said yes." And that's the key, is just raising our hand and saying, yes, I will, Lord. But not everyone will say yes, and the qualified may not say yes. So our transition to the field, going back to the resources, what did God give us as a family to go to the mission field? Well, he gave me the desire to serve. After all of our trips, I'm like, yeah, I feel like this is something that I can do. He gave us the resources to move. We were in debt up to our eyeballs, living the American dream. And God provided me with a good job to where we were able to get all those debts paid down and be debt-free as we moved into the mission field. And he gave us a good support network, not just with our home church, but with the district as well. And that network grew as we were able to host more teams. So it's amazing to see what God has given us. So those are the known resources that he gave us as a family. The unknown is I didn't know I was a planner. My wife still laughs at that. And strategy. So in order to host teams, he gave me these skills these skills were already in me, but I was able to hone them in. Project management. I actually enjoy evangelism, which is surprising. I didn't think that was even in me, and compassionate ministries. So before I went to the field, I had no idea that these things were underneath me, inside me. He gave me a connection to a Christian reggae band, which I didn't know who they were before I went to the mission field. And then he also gave me a connection to a pastor who had a huge passion for soccer and youth. So that's what he gave us, known and unknown. Question is, what did we give him back? Well, we gave him our time, obviously. We moved over in 2010 to the Philippines and stayed there for 3 years, and then moved to Honduras, Central America, and stayed there for 6 years. We gave him back working with teams and with nationals of each country. We planned projects, and we managed teams. We evangelized using different resources that he's given us through soccer balls, through Jesus Film, through handing out food, right? Those types of things. We built soccer fields, toured with the band that I talked about, and we showed Jesus Film and other films, not just the Jesus Film, for evangelism. Now, here's the question: where was he working? And this is the cool stuff. This is where you see divine intervention when he's working and we come join him. So in the Philippines, in the seminary where we lived, there's a town or a little shanty town, if you will, right next to it, right on the outside of the wall. It's called Rowenas. And it's one of the poorest places in Manila. And we were able to, with the APNTS seminary students, there was a church planted there, and there was a water project there. And we began to minister to that group. And to say that God penetrated that little area, that little shanty town is an understatement. God began to move. People began to come in. They opened up a Nazarene Compassionate Ministry Center right there too, where the children can come in for after school, which we'd call after school, feeding programs twice a week. And it's just amazing to see how God used the resources that we had, that he gave us, and multiplied that into some serious kingdom building effort. So God was working at 3 de Mayo, which is 3rd of May. Like in Guyana, they said they had numbers. In the colonies in Tegucigalpa and around the cities in Honduras, they named them after the dates that the little area was started. So this one was 3rd of May, which means this colony, this little neighborhood, started in the 3rd of May. So at 3 de Mayo, there's a pastor there named Christian. And he's the pastor who had a passion for soccer and a passion for youth. And he had just received a team, a working witness team, and they said they built him Sunday school classes on the first floor, the ground level, and then above it they had a sanctuary. So he had 3 classrooms in there and a little bitty area to kind of have Sunday school as a group for the adults, and it was a beautiful thing. But then about 3 or 4 weeks to a month later, God began to talk to Christian, and he said, Christian, I want you to tear out those Sunday school classrooms, and I want you to put a soccer field down here. He's like, what? So he said, I'll talk to the board. He confirmed with God one more time. He goes to the board, and the board says, are you crazy? We just have these beautiful Sunday school classrooms where the kids are coming, all 22 kids, and we're going to leave these here. It's thousands of dollars that was invested in our church. And he goes, but God is talking to me about this, you know. So he goes, I'll talk to my dad. So he goes over to his dad and says, Dad, this is kind of what God's telling me, and I think I need to tear the classrooms out. And he goes, are you crazy? It doesn't make sense. So he's like, well, I can't help it. This is what I'm being told. So he goes back to the board and says, look, I don't know why you're against this idea except for the monetary reason, but God is saying to do this, so we're going to do this. And the board agreed, okay, if God's with us, let's do this. So they tore out the entire classrooms, they cleared out the entire first floor, ground level, and they put this soccer field in. And the soccer field's about the size of this church, and a little skinnier. And it had AstroTurf, lighting and everything, and a little bleacher set over here. And they began having soccer for the really small kids, probably about 6th grade and down, twice a week. And they were ministering to 22 kids, and that number grew to 160 in about 3 months because of some crazy idea that Christian had, that God gave. God gave him that idea, and resources were provided to build that soccer field, and God was already working in the lives of those kids and in Christian. So we bring the resources that God gives us, we join it where he's already working, and he multiplies what we give. The Jesus film showings are, if you guys have not been on a Jesus film trip, I would go. It's amazing to watch how God uses a simple film made in the 70s, still relevant today. Why? Because the words are his words. It's the Bible. It is not edited to anything. It's just those words, and it's always truth going out. And God still uses it today. It's amazing. We've gone to showings where we had one person stand up. I've gone to showings where we've had over 100 come forward and accept Christ or recommit their lives to Christ. I've never had a rain out because God has always taken care of, when we bring the resources and he's ready to work, we've had rain come, but it went right around us twice. We had a few drops fall on us, and people began to walk away, and I pulled the team together and said, hey, let's pray. And God stopped the rain. That's God working, blessing our resources he gave us and our time and commitment, and said, okay. So, and that showing there, it was with a Maryland team, a youth team, love youth teams, and it was, I don't know how many came forward, probably 40 or 50. But that 40 or 50 made that community a difference, and that church made a difference, and they were able to follow up in that community and change a community because we spent our resources that he gave us and joined him where he's working. Now the reggae band, the Christian reggae band, which sounds crazy. We were in the Philippines with a team from Hawaii, and the pastor there says, you know who would like it here? I'm like, no, who? He said, Christafari. I'm like, who's Christafari? What is Christafari? I don't understand. It's a Christian reggae band. I'm like, oh, okay. So he put us in touch with Mark Moore, the lead singer and founder of Christafari, and that relationship began. And he toured with us in the Philippines. Like, if you don't know the Philippines, it's 7,000 islands, and we plane jumped or pedal jumped all across the Philippines like 23 times to do 23 concerts. But then we moved to Honduras. He goes, I want to come to Central America. Okay. So our first concert in Tegucigalpa, we had to get permission to go there, and it was quite the scene. It was just a little stage, probably about the size of this, in the middle of an intersection on dirt roads, in the middle of this little pueblo, this little colony, I'll call it. And we began playing the concert. And at the end of the concert, oh, by the way, we had to ask the gang there if we could play, and they gave us permission. And then at the end of the concert, we were kind of waved over to the side, and they said, hey, we want you to meet somebody. And we're like, okay, but you have to go in this little room. So we went in this little room, tucked away, and no windows, just 2 doors in and out. And it was the drug lord. It was the gang leader there. And they said he gave his life to Christ. We're like, oh. He said, but you can't tell anybody or he will be killed. So he's got to gingerly work his way out of this mess. But how amazing is God when we bring our resources to where he's working into an area that's super dangerous, and he changed the life of a drug lord. And I don't know how many people he pulled with him, but it was a big deal. That's a miracle. Last story that I have about God using resources we brought in the Philippines, down south in Cagayan de Oro. It's a mountainous area, and there's a lake up on top of the mountain, and people were deforesting around the lake, and it's on the side of a mountain. And a typhoon, there's 7 typhoons on average that hit the Philippines every year, and as this typhoon came over, it raised the level of the lake, and it crested over the edge. Well, as it did this, the entire lake came down because there's no trees to kind of hold up this edge anymore. And this is not a small lake, and it came down the mountain, carrying with it all the deforested trees, and the trees were massive. You don't have trees around here like that. I mean, they're massive, massive trees. So you've got these tens of thousands of pounds of wood coming down like torpedoes and clearing out 25,000 families' homes. In the middle of the night, this happened at 11:30 p.m. when it kind of finally broke. We come down with Compassion Ministries and Disaster Relief, and we're around looking at this place. And all along the river that this followed out to, where houses were side by side, flat, nothing on, just foundations. You can see where the foundations were, but every house is cleared out. By the grace of God, but sad, 2,000 lost their lives, but out of 25,000 homes, that's a miracle in and of itself. We came down, and they had this community broke up into 9 tent cities And a team from Susanville, California brought a medical team. We began to minister to one of those tent cities. And God was moving in it in an incredible way. There was about 1,200 to 1,300 people in that tent city, in that tent community, tent city. And we began having free clinics all week long coming through. And as we see people, they come in, they register, and they see the doctor, and then they sit through, they come to the prayer station, and we begin to pray with them. And then they get their medicine, and they leave. And at the end of the week, the team leader came to me with a little piece of paper, I may still have it, newspaper. It says 1070. I'm like, what's that? That's the number of people that accepted Christ. 1,070. I was like, whoa. It takes you back. It's like, and it wasn't us doing this, right? This is people in desperate need for a Savior. People who have no hope at all. We provided hope for them. Still humbling to think about that. Why would he choose me to be a part of that? But he brought the resources, or he gave us the resources. We brought them there where he's working already in people's hearts and lives in a desperate situation and multiplied that. Absolutely amazing. I have until when? I'm good. I think he said I had an extra half hour. Okay. I'm going to hurry. So, needless to say, we ended up back in Indianapolis. I work at Shepherd Community now, which is a compassionate ministry site as well, where we have a school and we do all kinds of things. We have a wide spectrum of services that we do. But I came back and called Jay Height, the director, and said, Jay, I want to serve. I don't really want to go back to a real job. Can I come and serve? Do you have a place for me to serve? And started working there with the food program. And weird enough, I didn't start the food program. I started out completely different. But today, I'm working with the pantry, and I'm working with delivering food to our neighbors. Isn't God pretty cool? God kind of brought that full circle to where I'm visiting. Well, I'm not visiting, but we have volunteers that come in and visit. And we take probably 25 deliveries a day to our neighbors who are in food emergencies. And we partner with Gleaners. So they provide the food, and we provide the transportation out. And it's not about the food for us. It's about making connections to our neighbors. Why are you in a food emergency? What's going on? How can we help? Did you lose a job? We have job placement. We have job training. Need daycare? We have daycare. More than likely, you're going to qualify for it for free because the state will pay for it. So I took the resources God gave me, and I'm over here now in Shepherd, waiting to find out where he's working next. He's working at Shepherd too, and on the near east side of Indianapolis. So for us, coming back, I was telling you, it's like, God, are you still going to use me? We left for various reasons, but it was time. It was physically, emotionally. We were not good self-care people, and it was just time to come back. And I was like, man, I feel like I'm reneging on my call, but at the same time, we had to. And I'm just like, man, Lord, please use me still. And I'm just going to raise my hand and say he has. He's been faithful to use me in all my brokenness. And it's been awesome to watch him to use. And he will use anybody who's willing to raise their hand and step forward and say, I want to be used. But the heading back to home was scary, again, about not being used. Would I fit back in? Would we fit back into the culture? We still haven't quite fit in yet. I don't think we ever will, but that's just through our experience in the mission field. And again, I didn't want to go back to a normal job. So I share all of this to let you know that the Nazarene Church is being used, not just what I've seen, but all across the world. We're talking about countries in northern Africa that we can't even talk about here, right, that are in heavy Muslim. I just talked to the regional director of Africa, and they're moving their office from Johannesburg to Côte d'Ivoire to be closer to the area where they're expanding, to the Sahara, to Libya, to the places up there where you have to get kind of creative to get into, to the Muslim area. And he says the church is growing. It's because we are taking our resources now to northern Africa. We're planting there, and we're saying we're going to enter into this area where God's already working, where God's already moving. So there's so many more stories that I can't share because time limits, but I just want you to be encouraged that the church that you were worshiping in today is not just here in Bedford, but it's all over the world. And it's the same God. And it's the God that is so powerful and moves so much. He just wants you to be a part of that. And it doesn't have to be in another country. Right here in Bedford, you have needs. You have people next door who need hope. I don't have to tell you, the last few years have been kind of crazy, right? People are out there who are sitting at home isolated, still afraid to go out. We can be hope for them. We can be a connection for them. You can knock on the door to your neighbor and say, hey, haven't seen you for a while. How you doing? That's a foreign idea in the United States. Sometimes you might be afraid to knock on that door, and they may not be so nice when they get to the door. But follow where God's leading. Follow his promptings. He's not going to lead you wrong, right? He may lead you somewhere scary, but he won't lead you into danger. He won't lead you into something that he doesn't want you to go. Let me skip along here. So we'll go back to my 3 questions. What resources has he given you? You personally and this church. What has he given you? I mean, you got a lot of people here and the second service. I guarantee you have skills he can and will use. What can you give back? I had known resources and I had unknown resources. To find those unknown resources, he had to stretch me. He had to put me in positions where I wasn't comfortable. And the question is, are you willing to allow him to put you in positions where you're uncomfortable, to uncover those unknown resources he's given you? And you're not too old, and you're not too young. And then, where is he working? Where is he working around here, around your home? Find those. He will show you. He will open those doors and say, poof, I want you to work here. And it may be something that doesn't look like it makes sense. But if he's asking you to go there, do it. Go there. Is it your school? Is it your work? Is it your neighbor? Is it your family? I'll tell you right now, ministering to my family is the hardest thing for me to do. I come from a background of non-believers, and it's super hard. I have fear and trepidation, things that don't make sense, but I'm trying to break down those things. That was free information there. And you mentioned already, Gary, about the World Evangelism Fund. Today is Faith Promise Focus. And I want you to know that when the money comes in, it's not just certain areas. All the missionaries are benefited from this too. The work going on around the globe this is how we fuel our missionary arm of our church, through World Evangelism Fund. So what you give makes a huge difference to a lady that is at the end of a 2-hour hike giving food, and we're answer to her prayer. Lastly, just real quick, one last idea, one last concept is at the feeding of the 5,000. You all know the story, I think. Basically, 5,000 men plus women and children are there listening to Jesus, and he gives them a challenge. Go feed these people. And then they go out and find this boy and his lunch. And the loaves and fish are not big, they're small. My question to you is this: do you think anybody else in that crowd of, let's just say, 10,000 had food on them? Is it a possibility that they had food on them? We don't know. But one boy was willing to take what he did have, give his resource to them, to give his lunch to them. I'm pretty sure that someone else had food out there too, right? But one boy was willing to go out and say, here, take my lunch. And God was there working already. He multiplied what he gave. So don't be some of the crowd that had food and didn't want to give it up, right? Give your fish and loaves up and let God use them in amazing ways.